My name is ARIANA. I was 29. I had a 7-year-old daughter named Julia, and I'd been with Derek since I was 21. We weren't married on paper, but we lived together, shared a lease, shared a bed, shared a kid. For all purposes, he was my husband. And for the last 2 years of those 8, we were the kind of miserable that doesn't scream. It whispers. The kind where you can't finish a sentence without it turning into something ugly. Where every conversation has a fuse attached to it. Where you wake up next to someone and feel lonelier than if the bed were empty. We fought about money, about dishes, about whose turn it was to pick up Julia from school. We fought about nothing, because the real problem was bigger than any of those things, and neither of us had the guts to say it out loud. We didn't love each other anymore. Maybe we hadn't for a long time, but we stayed, because staying was easier than figuring out what came next. Every time we had a bad fight, and there were plenty, I'd threaten to pack up Julia's stuff and go to my mom's house. That was my move, the card I played when I had nothing left. And every time I said it, Derek would look at me with an expression I'll never forget. Not angry, not sad, just blank. Like he'd already accepted it and honestly didn't care either way. That look hurt more than anything he ever said to me, because it meant I didn't matter enough for him to fight for. Still, I stayed. I kept staying. I told myself it was for Julia, that she needed both parents under the same roof. But the real reason was simpler. I was scared. Of being alone, of starting over, of what people would say, of showing up at my mom's door like a failure. Then came the Saturday that ended the staying. Late September. The kind of day where the air smells like fall, but the heat hasn't fully let go. I'd taken Julia to the park. We were only gone maybe 45 minutes before it started drizzling. That light, lazy rain that soaks you before you realize it's serious. So we turned around and headed home early. I remember walking up the steps. Julia was holding my hand, talking about a squirrel she'd seen. I turned the key, pushed the door open, and there it was. Derek was on the couch. He wasn't alone. The girl from next door, Megan, maybe 22, 23, was sitting beside him with his arm around her shoulder, and their faces close enough that I knew exactly what I'd walked into. I always thought I knew what I'd do in that moment. I'd scream, I'd throw things, I'd lose my mind. Every woman imagines the scene, the explosion, the dramatic rage. But that's not what happened. I just stood there. Julia was still holding my hand. She looked at me, then at her dad, then at the girl. Nobody moved. It was like time had frozen and we were all stuck inside a photograph nobody agreed to pose for. Megan slid off the couch, grabbed her phone, and walked past me without a word. Didn't look at me. Didn't look at Julia. Just slipped out the door like smoke. Then Derek opened his mouth and said the thing every man says when he gets caught. He said it wasn't what it looked like. He said he could explain. He said I was overreacting. And something about hearing those words, those tired, recycled, pathetic words, snapped me out of whatever trance I'd been in. Because suddenly I could feel again. And what I felt was not rage. It was clarity. I walked past him, went to the bedroom, pulled a suitcase out of the closet and started packing. Julia's clothes first, then mine. He followed me in, talking the whole time, pulling things out of the suitcase as fast as I put them in. Like if he could just slow me down, I'd change my mind. I didn't change my mind. I packed what I could, grabbed Julia, called a car, and left. I didn't call my mom first. I just showed up. Almost 8 at night when we pulled into her driveway. She opened the door and her face went through 5 emotions in 2 seconds. Surprise, confusion, concern, recognition, and then that particular sadness that mothers get when they see their child hurting and already know why. She hugged me. I cried for the first time that day. Julia held my hand and watched me cry with the quiet seriousness of a child who understands more than anyone wants her to. That night, I lay next to my daughter in the narrow bed of my old room and stared at the ceiling and felt something I hadn't expected. Relief, not happiness, not peace. Just this strange, exhausted relief. Like I'd been holding my breath for 2 years and had finally let it out. I thought the hard part was over. I thought catching Derek was the worst thing that was going to happen to me, and everything after would just be rebuilding. I had no idea that the man who was going to truly break my heart hadn't walked into my life yet. He was going to show up Monday morning with a tool belt, and my mother's phone number already saved in his contacts. Derek showed up the next morning. Sunday, stood on Mom's porch with his hands in his pockets, and that apologetic face he wore like a costume whenever he knew he'd gone too far. He wanted to talk. He wanted another chance. He said it was a mistake. Said it didn't mean anything. Said he'd been stupid. Mom, bless her, actually told me to hear him out. Give him a chance, she said. People mess up. I looked at him standing there. I thought about Megan on my couch. I thought about Julia's face in that doorway. I said no, clearly, once, and I meant it. He came back Monday. Same thing. I said no again. He'd come back several more times over the following weeks, each attempt a little more desperate than the last. Flowers one time, a handwritten letter another, once with Julia's favorite stuffed animal like he could use our daughter as currency. I said no every single time. Not because I was strong, because every time I looked at him, I felt nothing. Absolutely nothing. And nothing is harder to argue with than love. Now here's something I didn't know when I moved in. Mom had been doing renovations. She was on vacation from her job at the hospital, 2 weeks off, and she'd decided to use the time to fix things up. The kitchen was half torn apart. There was scaffolding along the side of the house where the wood trim under the roof had rotted from years of rain, paint cans in the hallway, drop cloths over the living room furniture. The whole place was in that chaotic state where nothing is broken but nothing is finished. She'd hired someone to do the work. Monday morning. I was finishing breakfast, getting Julia ready for school, trying to settle into some kind of routine in this new, temporary life, when I heard the front door open. Mom called out a hello. A voice answered from the hallway. A man's voice. Warm. A little low. Polite in the way people are when they're not sure if they belong in a space yet. He came into the kitchen, and Mom introduced us. His name was Lucas. Maybe 31, 32. Tall, lean, dark hair, the kind of face that was handsome without advertising it. He smiled when he shook my hand, this quick, almost shy smile, and his eyes stayed on mine for 1 second longer than they needed to. I felt something. I didn't want to feel it. I'd been separated for exactly 4 days. My daughter was sitting right there eating cereal. My life was wreckage. The last thing I needed was to feel anything for anyone. But I felt it anyway. This tiny, warm current that passed through me when his hand touched mine. Brief. Small. The kind of thing you can convince yourself you imagined if you try hard enough. I grabbed my keys, grabbed Julia, and left for the day. That night, when Julia was asleep, I was sitting in the kitchen with Mom, and it slipped out before I could stop it. "That guy you hired is pretty cute, huh?" I said it like a joke, half a joke. The kind of thing you say to test the water without admitting you're testing anything. Mom's reaction was strange. She looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. Not amused, not angry. Something in between. Something guarded. She changed the subject. I let it go. But I noticed. All that week I saw Lucas every morning. He'd show up around 7:30, right when Julia and I were having breakfast. He'd say good morning, smile that quiet smile, and get to work. Sometimes I'd hear him on the ladder outside, the scrape of old wood being pulled away, the tap of a hammer. Sometimes I'd catch him through the kitchen window, and he'd catch me looking, and we'd both look away 1 second too late. By Wednesday, I knew I was in trouble. Not the good kind. The kind where you know you're feeling something you shouldn't be feeling. Not yet. Not this soon. And you can see yourself heading toward it anyway, like watching a car drift across the center line in slow motion. I told myself to stop. I told myself it was loneliness, just the contrast between Derek's coldness and this stranger's warmth. I told myself a lot of things that week. None of them worked. Thursday morning, he asked me how I was doing. Not the polite version, the real version. He said it softly, like he actually wanted to know. I said I was fine. He nodded, paused, and said, "Your mom told me you just went through a rough patch. I'm sorry about that." Something about the way he said it, careful, gentle, like he was trying not to overstep, made my chest tighten. I thanked him and left the room before I could say anything stupid. Saturday was different because I didn't have work. Mom had errands to run, groceries, and a stop at the hardware store, so she left me at the house with Julia and Lucas. Julia was in the living room watching cartoons. I was in the kitchen making coffee, and Lucas was on the other side of the counter, taking a break, drinking water from a bottle and looking at me in a way that made me forget, just for a moment, about everything else. We talked, really talked, for the first time. He told me he was from the neighborhood, lived with his older brother about 10 minutes away, single. Had been for a while. Did handyman work, small contracting jobs, liked working with his hands. He was easy to talk to in a way that surprised me because at first, he'd seemed so reserved, so careful with his words. But the longer we talked, the more he opened up. And by the time I looked at the clock, he'd been sitting there for over an hour and hadn't touched a single tool. He asked about my separation. I told him the short version. He listened without interrupting, without offering advice, without trying to fix anything. He just listened. And when I finished, he said 4 words that rewired something inside my chest. "You deserve better than that." Simple. No performance behind it. He said it like it was obvious, like it was a fact he'd observed the way you'd observe that the sky is blue. And I believed him. Not because the words were special, because of the way he looked at me when he said them. After that Saturday, everything shifted. Not dramatically. No declaration, no kiss, no big moment. Just a quiet, steady pull. Every morning when he arrived, our eyes would meet and hold for a beat too long. When we passed each other in the hallway, I'd feel the warmth of his arm near mine. When he laughed at something Julia said, my stomach would flip. It was the kind of thing you can't fake and can't force and can't stop once it starts. I hadn't felt any of that with Derek in years. Maybe ever. Then on Thursday of the second week, Lucas didn't come. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe he had another job. Maybe he needed a day off. But Friday came and he didn't show either. Saturday morning, I asked Mom. Casual, trying to keep my voice flat. "Hey, where's Lucas? Isn't he coming back to finish up?" She didn't look at me. She kept stirring whatever was on the stove. "He's done. Finished Thursday. Didn't you see? Everything's fixed." I looked around. The trim was painted. The kitchen was back together. The scaffolding was gone. She was right. He was done. The job was over and he'd left without saying goodbye. Something dropped inside me. Not heartbreak, not yet, but this hollow sinking feeling. Like someone had pulled a plug and all the warmth I'd been collecting just drained out. "Oh," I said. I didn't realize. Mom's tone when she answered was strange. Clipped. Almost harsh. "Well, now you know." She didn't turn around. She just kept stirring. I stood in that doorway holding my coffee mug, trying to understand why she sounded angry, trying to understand why the house suddenly felt so empty, trying to understand why losing someone I barely knew could hurt this much. I didn't bring it up again, but I thought about him. Every day, every single day, I'd catch myself at the front window looking at the street, wondering if his truck might pass. I'd replay our Saturday conversation, hearing his voice, remembering the way he leaned against the counter, the way he said "you deserve better" like it cost him nothing and meant everything. Weeks passed. I settled into a rhythm at Mom's house that wasn't comfortable, but was at least predictable. Wake up, get Julia ready, drop her at school, go to work at the insurance office, come home, make dinner, put Julia to bed, sit in the quiet, think about Lucas, hate myself for thinking about Lucas, go to sleep, repeat. Then, almost 2 months after my separation, I ran into him. Main Street. The little strip of shops near the center of town. Julia was at Mom's. I'd gone out alone. Just errands, just movement, just an excuse to not sit in that house for another Saturday afternoon. I was coming out of the pharmacy when I heard my name. ARIANA? I turned around, and there he was. Same dark eyes, same careful posture, same quiet warmth radiating off him like heat from something that's been holding it in for a long time. He looked the same, maybe a little different. A haircut, a shirt I hadn't seen before, but essentially the same man who'd leaned against my mother's kitchen counter and made me forget I was supposed to be broken. I couldn't speak for a second. My heart was doing something fast and irregular, and my hands felt suddenly useless. He smiled, that same shy smile, and I smiled back. And for a moment we just stood there on the sidewalk, like two people who'd been looking for each other without knowing it. The first thing he asked was whether I'd gotten back together with Derek. I said no. Something in his face shifted. Relief, maybe. Or hope. It was quick, but I saw it. He asked if I wanted to grab coffee. I had things to do. Errands, responsibilities, a daughter waiting at home. I said yes before any of that could matter. We walked to a small cafe 2 blocks over. Mismatched chairs, chalkboard menu. We sat at a tiny table by the window, and he started talking, and what he said knocked the breath out of me. He told me he'd thought about me. Not occasionally. Not in passing. Every day. Multiple times a day. He said after he finished the job at my mom's house, he'd felt this emptiness he couldn't explain, like something important had ended before it had a chance to begin. He told me he'd driven past the house a few times hoping to catch a glimpse of me. He admitted it like a confession, like he was ashamed of it but couldn't keep it inside anymore. That Sunday, he said, when I drove by and you were in the yard, and you waved at me, I almost pulled over. I almost got out of the car and told you everything right there. But I didn't know if you felt the same way, and I didn't want to make things harder for you. I sat there listening to this man tell me he'd been carrying me in his head for weeks the same way I'd been carrying him. And I felt something I hadn't felt in so long I'd almost forgotten the word for it. Wanted. Not needed. Not tolerated. Not settled for. Wanted. He asked for my number. I gave it to him. He offered to drive me home. I said yes. When we pulled up to Mom's Street, he parked a little ways from the house, and we sat in his truck for a moment, neither of us reaching for the door handle. Then he leaned over and kissed me. Soft, slow, deliberate, like he'd been thinking about it for a long time and wanted to get it exactly right. I kissed him back like I meant it, because I did. And when I finally got out of his truck, I felt dizzy. Not sick dizzy, alive dizzy. The kind where the world looks sharper and brighter than it did 10 minutes ago. I walked into the house. Mom was in the kitchen. She looked at me and narrowed her eyes slightly, the way she did when she was trying to solve something. "You look different," she said. "I'm fine, Mom." You're smiling. Is that a crime? She paused. Then she asked if I'd been seeing Derek. If maybe we were working things out. I said no. She asked why I'd been leaving Julia with her on weekends. I said I just needed time alone. She didn't believe me. I could see it in her face, but she didn't push it. Not that day. But her eyes followed me down the hallway, and when I closed the bedroom door and pressed my back against it, and held my phone against my chest and felt his name pulsing through the screen like a heartbeat, I didn't see what was already forming on my mother's face on the other side of that door. The same expression she'd worn when I called him cute. The same guarded, careful, unreadable thing that wasn't anger and wasn't worry and wasn't anything I had a name for yet. I wouldn't have a name for it until much later. The name was guilt. After that kiss in his truck, Lucas and I started texting constantly. Good morning messages before I opened my eyes. Late night conversations that stretched past midnight and picked up again before sunrise. He'd send me something funny he'd seen during the day, or ask how Julia was doing, or just say he was thinking about me. And I'd read his messages and feel this glow in my chest, this stupid, teenage, ridiculous warmth that had no business being there at 29 in my situation with my history. But there it was. He kept asking me out. A real date. Dinner, a movie, anything. And I kept finding excuses. Julia needs me. It's too soon. I'm not ready. The truth was, part of me was terrified. Not of Lucas. Of getting hurt again. Of opening something I couldn't close. Of trusting my own feelings after 8 years of trusting Derek and ending up on the wrong side of a couch with another woman's perfume in my living room. But Lucas didn't push. He never pressured, never guilted, never made me feel like I owed him anything. He just kept showing up, kept being patient, kept letting me know he was there whenever I was ready. And patience, real patience, the kind that doesn't have an agenda hiding behind it, is the most seductive thing in the world when you've spent years with someone who never had any. About 3 months after the separation, I said yes. I told Mom I was going out with a friend. Didn't say who. She gave me that look, the searching one, the one that had been getting sharper every week. But she agreed to watch Julia, and I left before she could ask more. Lucas picked me up at the end of the block. We drove to a restaurant 20 minutes outside of town, a quiet Italian place with low lighting and candles on the tables. For 3 hours, I forgot about everything. Derek, the couch, Megan, the spare room at my mother's house, the wreckage of the last 8 years. All of it fell away. We talked and laughed, and he reached across the table and held my hand. And when his thumb traced a slow circle on my palm, I thought, this is what it was supposed to feel like. This is what I was missing. This is what I almost convinced myself didn't exist. We didn't sleep together that night. But we kissed in his truck for a long time, and when I finally went inside, my lips were swollen, and my heart was racing, and I lay in bed next to Julia staring at the ceiling and felt, for the first time in years, like the future might actually have something good in it. The following Saturday we saw each other again, and that time we went to a motel on the edge of town, and everything I'd imagined was real and better than real, and I left that room feeling like a different person. Not because the physical part changed me, but because it confirmed what I'd been trying to deny for weeks. This wasn't loneliness. This wasn't rebound. This was something. But while I was falling, something else was happening in my mother's house. Something I was too happy to see. Mom was changing, not dramatically. Not in a way that would make someone from the outside think anything was wrong. But I lived with her. I saw her every morning and every night, and the woman I was looking at was not the same woman who had hugged me in the driveway the night I showed up with a suitcase and a 7-year-old. She'd started watching me. Not casually, deliberately. When I came home from work, her eyes would track me from the door to the hallway. When my phone buzzed at the dinner table, she'd glance at it, then at my face, then back to her plate, all in about half a second. When I came home late on a Saturday, She'd be sitting in the kitchen with the lights on and a cup of tea she hadn't touched, and she'd look up at me with an expression that wasn't worry. It was something else, something heavier, something that had weight and history behind it, and she kept asking questions. "Are you seeing Derek again? Are you working things out?" She asked this at least 4 times in 3 weeks. Not once did she ask if I was seeing someone else. Not once did she open that door. She only asked about Derek, over and over, like she was hoping the answer was yes, like she needed the answer to be yes, and I couldn't figure out why my mother, who had watched Derek humiliate me, who had held me while I cried on her porch, would want me back with him. Unless Derek wasn't what she was afraid of. I noticed other things. She'd started cleaning more, which sounds normal except for the way she did it. She'd scrubbed the kitchen counter where Lucas used to lean during our Saturday conversation. She'd rearranged the mugs in the cabinet, the same cabinet he used to grab a glass from. She changed the sheets on her bed twice in 1 week, which she never did. These were small things, invisible things. The kind of things that mean nothing unless you're looking for a pattern. And I wasn't looking for a pattern because I was too busy being happy to wonder why my mother was scrubbing the memory of a handyman out of her house. One night, maybe a week after the motel, I came home late. Past 11. Julia was asleep. Mom was in the kitchen. Not eating, not reading, just sitting there with her hands around a mug, staring at the wall across from her. When I walked in, she looked at me, and I saw something in her eyes that stopped me in the doorway. She looked like someone who was holding a piece of glass in their hand and trying to decide whether to set it down gently or let it shatter. "Where were you?" she asked. "Out. With a friend." "Which friend? Does it matter?" She didn't answer. She just looked at me. And in that silence, I felt the first thread of something pulling between us that hadn't been there before. Not anger, not suspicion. Something closer to dread. Like she could feel what was coming and was trying to hold it off with her eyes. I said goodnight and went to my room. The next morning, Sunday, she tried again. We were at the kitchen table. Julia was still asleep. Coffee between us. Morning light through the window. The same kitchen where I'd first met Lucas. The same counter where he'd leaned and told me I deserved better. "You've been acting different," Mom said. That smile. Those late-night texts. "Who is he?" I tried to brush it off. Told her I was just happy. Told her nothing was going on. She didn't buy it. She leaned forward, elbows on the table, eyes locked on mine. "Then who is it? You've been leaving Julia with me every Saturday. You come home glowing. You're hiding something." She wasn't wrong. I was hiding something. And standing there in that kitchen, I asked myself, why? Why was I hiding it? I wasn't doing anything wrong. I was separated. Derek and I were over. I was a grown woman who'd met someone who made her feel alive again. What was there to be ashamed of? So I told her, "Mom, remember that guy you hired? The one who did the renovation work?" I watched her face, and what I saw made something cold move through my entire body. Her expression didn't just change, it collapsed, like a building falling inward, floor by floor, starting from the top. Her eyes went wide, then narrow, then wide again. The color left her cheeks. She set her coffee mug down slowly, carefully, like it might shatter if she let go too fast. "Lucas," she said. Her voice was different, lower, strained, like someone speaking through a crack in a wall that was about to give way. "You're talking about Lucas?" I nodded. I even smiled a little when I said it, because I still didn't understand. I still thought this was going to be the lecture about moving too fast. "Yeah," I said. "Lucas. We ran into each other a while back and we started talking, and I don't know, Mom. He's really good to me. He's kind. He listens. He actually cares about what I have to say." She wasn't listening. She'd already left the conversation, gone somewhere inside herself, somewhere I couldn't follow. She pushed her chair back from the table, stood up, then sat back down, then stood up again. Her hands were shaking. Not a lot, but enough for me to notice. And that's when the first thread of real fear started pulling at my chest, because my mother's hands didn't shake. Not when my dad died. Not when I told her I was pregnant at 21. Not ever. Mom, what's going on? She started pacing. 3 steps to the fridge, turn. 3 steps to the stove, turn. 3 steps back. She was muttering. I caught pieces, words that didn't fit together. That fool. I knew it. Should have told her. She was talking to me and to herself at the same time, and neither version made sense. Mom, I said it louder. You're scaring me. What is it? She stopped, turned to face me, stood completely still for 5 seconds that felt like 5 minutes. Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again, and I watched her fight with whatever was inside her, watched her try to hold it back and then give up. And when the words finally came out, they hit me so hard I felt them in my chest before my brain could process them. I had a thing with him, ARIANA. I heard it. I know I heard it because I remember the exact pitch of her voice, the slight break on my name, the way the kitchen light was hitting the side of her face. I heard every word, but my brain refused to assemble them into meaning. Like someone had handed me a sentence in a language I used to speak, but had suddenly forgotten. What? While he was working here, before you moved in. We were together, him and me. The kitchen was silent. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere outside, a dog barked twice and stopped. Julia was still asleep down the hall. The world kept moving, steady and indifferent, while mine cracked right down the center. You and Lucas, I said. Not a question. A repetition. Like saying the words out loud might make them arrange themselves into something less impossible. It started about a week after I hired him. It just happened. One thing led to another. And before I knew it, he was staying over some nights. It wasn't planned. Neither of us meant for it to go that far. She was looking at me the way people look at you when they know they've broken something that can't be fixed. Apologetic, but also bracing. Preparing for impact. My first instinct, and I'm ashamed of how much space this took up, was to not believe her. To convince myself she was making it up. Some desperate motherly tactic to keep me from a mistake. Some overprotective lie designed to pull me back from the edge. But she wasn't lying. I knew it the way you know the ground is solid, because no one invents something this humiliating. No one paces their own kitchen with shaking hands and a cracking voice just to sell a bluff. And because the pieces were already falling into place, the pieces I'd been too happy to see. Her strange reaction the night I called him cute. The clipped tone when I asked where he'd gone. The tension that had no source I could name. The cleaning. The scrubbing of counters he'd touched. The sheets changed twice in 1 week. The way she kept asking about Derek, over and over, hoping I'd say yes. Because yes meant the thing she feared wasn't happening. It had all had a source. It had always had a source. He stayed here, I said slowly. Overnight. A few times. Yes. In this house. Yes. In your bed. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. I don't remember sitting down, but at some point I was in the chair, hands flat on the table, staring at a ring of coffee my mug had left on the wood. I thought about how that stain would never come out. I thought about how that was the dumbest thing a person could think in a moment like this. And then I stopped caring about what I was thinking because my brain was doing whatever it had to do to protect itself, and apparently that meant staring at a coffee ring instead of processing the fact that my mother and I had been with the same man. He never told you, she said. Not a question. No, I was afraid of that. Is that why you were acting so strange? Every time I mentioned him? She sat down across from me. Her hands were still trembling, but her voice had steadied, the way it does when someone crosses from panic into resignation. When you showed up here that night, with Julia and your suitcase, it was already over between me and Lucas. He finished the job, and after that he just stopped coming around, stopped calling. I think he lost interest once the work was done. But it hurt me, ARIANA, more than I expected. I was already dealing with that when you moved in, and then you started asking about him, and I didn't know how to tell you. I wanted to ask 100 questions. Whether he used the same words on her. Whether he leaned against her counter the same way. Whether he told her she deserved better too. But none of those questions could get past my throat, because the anger hadn't arrived yet. What I felt was something heavier. Shame. Not mine. Not just hers. The whole situation's. This enormous, suffocating thing that filled the kitchen like smoke from a fire nobody could see. He knew, I said, when he ran into me on the street, when he asked for my number, when he took me to dinner. He knew about you the whole time, and he never said a word. I believe he did. Did you call him? After I told you? She looked down. I called him before you even finished your coffee that morning. I told him what you'd said. I told him he needed to be honest with you, so he'd known I was coming. When I showed up at his door later that day, he'd already had time to prepare, to rehearse, to decide which version of himself to present and which truths to bury. I'd walked in thinking I had the upper hand, thinking I was the one with the information, and the whole time he'd been sitting there, warned, composed, ready. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Not dramatic crying. The quiet kind. The kind that happens when someone has been carrying something so long that releasing it doesn't feel like relief. It feels like bleeding. I should have told you sooner, she said. The moment I saw you looking at him differently, I should have said something. But I was embarrassed. I was 53 years old, and I'd been sleeping with a man half my age who did work on my house. And how do you tell your daughter that? How do you say those words without feeling like the kind of woman other women shake their heads about? I heard her. I understood, somewhere beneath the shock, that she'd been trapped in her own kind of shame, her own private humiliation running parallel to the one I was now drowning in. But understanding didn't dissolve what I was feeling. It just added another layer to it. Because now I wasn't just hurt for myself. I was hurt for her, for the way her voice cracked when she said his name, for the way she'd been scrubbing counters and changing sheets and watching me leave the house on Saturdays, knowing exactly where I was going and who I was going to, and carrying that knowledge in silence because the alternative was a conversation that would break us both. And it had broken us both. We were sitting at the same table where we'd had 1,000 easy mornings, and the distance between us was wider than it had ever been. And the man who'd put it there wasn't even in the room. I stood up. I didn't say anything. I walked to the bedroom, closed the door, sat on the bed next to my sleeping daughter, and stared at the wall. My phone was on the nightstand. His name was on the screen. 3 messages from that morning I hadn't read yet. I picked up the phone, looked at his name, and felt something I can only describe as the sound of 2 images of the same person being ripped apart. The Lucas who'd held my hand across a candlelit table, and the Lucas who'd been in my mother's bed weeks before. He looked into my eyes and told me I deserved better. The same man. The same hands. The same voice that said you deserve better to a woman while the woman's mother was still changing the sheets he'd slept on. I didn't cry. Not yet. I just sat there, holding my phone, staring at his name, and felt the future I'd been building inside my chest for the last 3 months collapse, like a house made of something that was never meant to hold weight. I drove to his place that afternoon. Didn't call ahead. Didn't want to give him any more preparation time than my mother had already handed him. His brother's house was a small ranch on the east side of town. Faded siding, chain link fence, his truck in the driveway. The same truck where he'd kissed me. The same truck where he'd parked down the street from my mother's house and told me he'd almost pulled over that Sunday to tell me everything. Everything. That word meant something different now. I knocked. He opened the door, and his face told me everything his mouth hadn't in 3 months. He knew exactly why I was there. No surprise, no confusion, just the flat, resigned expression of a man who's been waiting for a knock he hoped would never come. "You could have told me," I said. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. My voice was flat, controlled, almost clinical. The voice of a woman who'd used up all her screaming on the last man who lied to her and had nothing left for this one but precision. At any point, the cafe, the truck, the restaurant, the motel, any of those times, you had 100 chances to tell me the truth. He let me inside. The living room was small, sparse. A couch, a TV, a folding table with a laptop on it. He sat on the arm of the couch and looked at me, and I waited for the denial, the excuse, the version of events where he was the victim of circumstances and I was supposed to understand. What he said was worse than any of those things, because it was honest. "If I had told you," he said, "would you have given me a chance?" I stared at him. "Would you?" he repeated. "If I'd sat across from you at that cafe and said, 'By the way, I was involved with your mother a few weeks ago,' would you have stayed? Would you have given me your number? Would you have come to dinner?" That's not the point. It's exactly the point. I knew the second you found out, this would be over. So I made a choice. I chose to have whatever time with you I could, because I didn't want to lose you before I even had you. There's a kind of logic that sounds almost reasonable when you're hearing it and makes you physically sick when you think about it an hour later. This was that. Standing in his living room, looking at his face, I could almost follow the reasoning, almost trace the path from his perspective. He met my mother. It ended. He met me. He wanted me. He knew the truth would kill it. So he buried the truth and built something on top of it, and hoped the foundation would hold. But foundations built on buried things don't hold. They rot from underneath. And the thing rotting underneath us was my mother's bed, and his body in it. And the fact that he'd known all of that every single time he touched me. "When I got involved with your mom," he said, "I had no idea I was going to meet you. I didn't plan any of this. I showed up to do a job, and one thing led to another, and then you were there, and everything changed. I can't undo what happened before. All I can tell you is that what I feel for you is real. Real." He used that word, the same word I'd been using in my own head for weeks to describe what we had. It's real. This is real. This isn't rebound. This is something real. And now he was throwing it back at me like a shield. Like the word itself could absorb the impact of what he'd done. I looked at him. Really looked. Searched his face for the man I'd fallen for. The shy smile. The careful words. The patience. The warmth. And he was still there. That was the cruelest part. He hadn't changed. He was still the same man who'd traced a circle on my palm across a candlelit table and made me feel, for the first time in years, like I was worth someone's full attention. The same hands. The same eyes. The same voice. The same hands that had been on my mother. The same eyes that had looked at her the way they looked at me. The same voice that had probably said something just as careful, just as gentle, just as perfectly calibrated to make a lonely woman feel seen. "Did you tell her she deserved better too?" I asked. The question hit him like a slap. He blinked. His jaw shifted, and for the first time since I'd walked through his door, I saw something behind his composure crack. Not guilt exactly. Exposure. The look of a man who just realized the woman standing in front of him has seen all the way to the bottom of who he is. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. I knew. In that silence, I knew. Whatever he'd given me, he'd given her a version of it first. The attention, the listening, the softness, the way he said things that sounded like they cost him nothing but landed like they meant everything. He had a gift for making women feel chosen, and the gift worked because it felt genuine, and maybe it was genuine every time he used it, which somehow made it worse, because it meant he could feel something real for my mother, and then feel something real for her daughter, and not see the wreckage he was creating by letting both of those real things exist in the same family without ever saying a word. I wanted to believe him. I need you to understand how badly I wanted to, because if I believed him, none of this had to end. If I believed him, I could close my eyes and erase the last 3 hours and go back to being the woman in the Italian restaurant with candles on the table and a man's thumb tracing slow circles on her palm. I wanted that woman back. I wanted her so badly it made my ribs ache. But every time I reached for her, I saw my mother's face, the trembling hands, the pacing, the way she said I had a thing with him like she was pulling something sharp out of her own body. And I knew there was no way past this. Not for me, not for her, not for anyone. It's over, Lucas. He started to speak. Don't call me, don't text me, don't drive past the house. It's done. He looked at me for a long time. I watched him calculate, watched him decide whether to fight, whether there was one more sentence that could change the trajectory of what was happening. And then something in his expression settled, went quiet. Like a flame that had been burning behind his eyes finally went out. He nodded. Once. Slowly. The nod of a man accepting a verdict he knew was coming but hoped might land differently. I walked out, got in my car, sat in his driveway for 5 minutes without starting the engine. My hands were on the steering wheel, and my forehead was pressed against my knuckles, and I was crying. Hard. The kind where your whole body shakes and no sound comes out. Because I wasn't just losing Lucas. I was losing the feeling, the warmth, the aliveness, the version of myself that had existed for 3 months inside his attention. The version that laughed in restaurants and kissed in trucks and lay in motel rooms feeling beautiful and wanted and real. I was losing the possibility of something good, and I was losing it not because of anything I'd done, but because of something that had happened before I ever walked into my mother's kitchen on a Monday morning and felt a current pass through me when a stranger shook my hand. He tried a few more times over the following days. A text I didn't open. A call I let go to voicemail. He drove past the house on a Tuesday afternoon, slowed near the driveway. I was at the living room window. I saw his truck. I saw him look toward the house. I didn't move. He kept driving. After that, the messages stopped. But what came next was almost worse. Living with Mom after the truth became something I don't have a good word for. Not hostile. Not cold. More like the air between us had changed composition, like it was made of something thinner and harder to breathe. We moved around each other carefully, spoke when we had to, about Julia, about groceries, about logistics. But the real conversations, the late-night talks over coffee, the easy laughter, the comfortable silence of 2 women who loved each other without complication, all of it was gone. Replaced by this enormous unspoken thing that sat between us in every room like furniture nobody wanted, but nobody would move. She blamed me. Not openly. She never said the words, but I could feel it. In the way she looked at me when she thought I wasn't watching. In the way she pulled back when I tried to hug Julia goodnight. Like witnessing tenderness made something inside her flinch. In the heavy sighs that came from somewhere deeper than breathing. She'd been hurt by Lucas, too. He'd used her warmth and moved on. And then he'd done the same thing with her daughter. And the shame of that, the ugly symmetry of it, had built a wall between us that neither of us knew how to climb. I tried once. Sat down next to her on the couch one evening and said, "Mom, I didn't know. You have to believe that. If I'd known, I never would have gone near him. She nodded, but her eyes stayed on the TV. Her jaw stayed tight, and I understood that knowing I was blameless didn't make it hurt less. Sometimes understanding isn't the same as forgiveness. Sometimes a wound knows who caused it, but still bleeds when the wrong person touches it. Julia felt it too. Kids always do. She started eating faster, spending more time in our room with the door closed. She asked me once, in that blunt way only 7-year-olds manage, "Are you and Grandma mad at each other?" I told her no. She didn't believe me. She was right not to. Weeks turned into a month. The house that had felt like refuge when I first arrived started feeling like a pressure chamber. Every room was charged with something unresolved. The kitchen where Mom told me the truth. The hallway where Lucas used to set down his toolbox. The front porch where she used to stand and watch him leave, though I only realized that later. The whole place was haunted, not by ghosts, but by the memory of something none of us could talk about. And in the middle of all of it, Derek kept calling. I'd been saying no for months, automatic, reflexive, but something was different now. Not about him, about me. I was tired, bone deep, soul level tired. Tired of sleeping in a narrow bed next to my daughter in a room that didn't feel like mine. Tired of tiptoeing around my own mother. Tired of waking up in a house where the silence was louder than any argument I'd ever had with Derek. So when he called on a Thursday night, I picked up. And when he asked for the 100th time if we could talk, I said okay. He came over the next evening. We sat on Mom's front porch, and he gave me the speech. The new version of himself. The waking up. The wanting to be better. I'd heard it before. I knew the rhythm, the pauses, which words were real, and which were just sounds arranged in the right order. But here's the thing. Nobody tells you about going back to someone you left. It's not always about love. Sometimes it's about math. You add up what staying costs and what leaving costs, and you go where the numbers hurt less. And in that moment, on that porch, the math was simple. Staying at Mom's was destroying what was left of our relationship. I had no savings for my own place. Julia needed stability. And Derek, for all his failures, was offering a roof, a routine, and an end to the quiet war I'd been fighting in my mother's house for weeks. I told him I'd come back. Not because I loved him, not because I'd forgiven him, because I needed to leave that house before it finished breaking the only 2 relationships I had left. We moved back the following weekend. Mom helped me pack. She was gentle about it, almost too gentle, like she was handling something fragile that had already been dropped once. When I carried the last bag to the car, she hugged me in the driveway, and it was the first real hug we'd shared in weeks, and I felt her body relax against mine, and I understood. She was relieved, not happy. Relieved. Like a pressure valve had finally turned and she could breathe again now that I was going. Now that the living reminder of what Lucas had done, of what they'd both done, of the ugly symmetry that had turned mother and daughter into a punchline neither of them would ever say out loud, was leaving her house and taking the evidence with her. That realization hurt more than anything Derek ever did. More than Megan on the couch. More than the blank look on his face every time I threatened to leave. More than any of it. Because Derek hurt me like a careless man hurts a woman he stopped thinking about. But my mother was relieved to see me go. And that's how a woman who loves you hurts you. Not with cruelty. With the exhale she can't hide when you finally walk out the door. The first month back with Derek was quiet, in the way hospitals are quiet. Everything padded. Everything careful. We moved around each other like two people sharing a room neither of them had chosen, speaking gently, avoiding the topics with teeth. He didn't bring up Megan. I didn't bring up anything. We existed in this gray, neutral space where nothing was great, but nothing was terrible. And I told myself that was enough. I told myself Julia's happiness justified everything. Julia did seem happier. She had her room back, her routine, her school friends within walking distance. She stopped eating fast. She stopped closing doors. She started laughing at dinner again. That loud, full laugh that kids have before the world teaches them to make it smaller. And every time I heard it, I told myself I'd made the right choice. But at night, when the house was dark and Derek was asleep beside me, and the only sound was the hum of the ceiling fan, my mind went to Lucas. Every single night, without fail, without permission. I'd think about the cafe, the way he leaned forward when he talked, like every word I said was the only sound in the room. I'd think about his truck, the kiss, the softness of it, how it felt like the first real thing that had happened to me in years. I'd think about the motel room, the way he looked at me afterward, the way he traced his finger down my arm and said nothing and didn't need to, because the silence between us was never empty. It was always full. And then I'd think about my mother saying I had a thing with him, and the warmth would curdle inside my chest like milk hitting acid, and I'd lie there feeling sick and hollow and furious. Not at him, not at her, but at whatever arrangement of the universe had decided that the first person to make me feel alive in years had to come pre-ruined, had to arrive in my life already carrying a secret that would make loving him impossible. Because that's the thing I couldn't get past. Not the betrayal, not the lie, the timing. If Lucas had met me first, if I'd been the one in that kitchen when he showed up with his tool belt and his shy smile, none of this would have happened. We would have been a love story. Simple, clean, real. But he didn't meet me first. He met my mother first. And by the time he walked into my life, he was already carrying a history that would detonate the second it was exposed. He didn't choose to meet her first. She didn't choose to fall for him. I didn't choose to show up at her house the week after it ended. Nobody chose the sequence. But the sequence chose all of us, and the result was a daughter and a mother who shared something no daughter and mother should ever share, and a man who walked away clean while two women were left holding the wreckage. That's what I kept coming back to. Lucas walked away. He lost me, yes. But he didn't lose a mother. He didn't lose a home. He didn't have to sit across from someone at Thanksgiving and feel the air thicken every time a certain kind of silence settled between them. He got to drive his truck to his brother's house and close the door and be done. We didn't get to be done. We had to keep living in the aftermath, me and Mom, every day, trying to rebuild something that had a crack running through its center that neither of us could plaster over because the crack was shaped like a person. I talk to Mom again now. We rebuilt things, slowly, carefully, the way you'd rebuild a house after a flood. Not the same structure, smaller, more cautious, different weight limits. We don't mention Lucas. We never mention Lucas. His name is a door we both agreed to keep shut, and most days that's fine. Most days I can sit across from her at breakfast and talk about Julia's school, or the weather, or what's on sale at the grocery store, and almost forget that the woman pouring my coffee once lay in the same bed, with the same man who made me feel like the future had something in it worth reaching for. Almost. But some days I can feel it pressing from the other side of that closed door. The weight of everything we left unsaid. The questions I never asked. Did he hold her the same way? Did he listen to her the same way? Did she feel that same warm current when he touched her hand? Did she lie awake at night replaying his words the way I did? Did she stand at the kitchen window and watch for his truck the way I stood at the living room window and watched for his truck? Were we the same woman to him? Different faces, same loneliness, same hunger, same need to be told we deserved better by someone whose voice made the words sound like truth. I don't ask. She doesn't offer, and the door stays shut. Derek and I are still together, if you can call it that. We have good weeks and bad weeks. Sometimes we laugh. Sometimes we fight about the same things we always fought about. the dishes, the money, whose turn it is. Nothing has changed. He's the same man he was before, and I'm the same woman. Except I'm not. Something in me shifted during those months at my mother's house, and it never shifted back. Some part of me that had been asleep for years woke up in that kitchen on a Saturday morning when a man with dark eyes and a careful voice sat across from me and made me forget I was supposed to be broken. And that part of me is still awake, still listening, still waiting for a voice that isn't coming. I don't look Lucas up. I don't drive past his brother's house. I don't search his name. Because I know that if I saw his face again, even in a photograph, whatever wall I've built to hold this back would come down, and I'm not sure I could survive building it twice. But I'd be lying if I said I don't think about him. I think about him more than I should. More than is fair to Derek, to Julia, to my mother, to myself. I think about him in the morning when the house is quiet and the light comes through the kitchen window at that low angle that reminds me of the morning we met. I think about him at night when I'm staring at the ceiling, counting the minutes until sleep. I think about what we might have built, whether we'd still be together now, somewhere, in some version of this life where the past didn't reach forward and rip the future apart before it started. I'll never know. And that, I think, is the part that hurts the most. Not the loss. Not the betrayal. Not the silence between me and my mother or the emptiness beside me in this bed. It's the not knowing. The question that sits in my chest like something I swallowed that will never dissolve. What if he was the one? What if he was the real thing? The person I was supposed to find? And I had to walk away not because of anything broken between us, but because of something that happened before us, something neither of us chose. Something that was already over before it became the reason we couldn't begin. I caught Derek on our couch with another woman, and I walked out the same day. Packed a bag, grabbed my daughter, didn't look back. Everyone told me I was brave. Everyone said I was strong. But the truth is, the hard part was never leaving Derek. The hard part was finding something real with someone else, and having to leave that too. Not because he hurt me. Not because he didn't care. But because his hands had been somewhere they shouldn't have been before they ever touched mine. And knowing that made every touch, every kiss, every whispered sentence feel like something borrowed from a woman who was sitting in the next room trying not to cry. My mother, who loved me enough to tell me the truth, and who was relieved when I left. I sleep next to Derek now. The fan hums. The house is dark. Julia is down the hall in her room, growing taller every week, asking questions I'm not ready to answer, turning into a person who will one day understand that her mother went back to a man she didn't love, because the man she did love had already been loved by the wrong person first. And some nights, when the ceiling is all I can see, and the silence is thick enough to hold the weight of everything I'm carrying, I close my eyes, and I let myself feel it one more time. Not the shame, not the anger, just the wanting. The pure, clean, unbroken wanting that was there before I knew the truth, and is still there now, underneath everything, quiet and stubborn and permanent. I miss him the way you miss air when you're underwater. Constant, total. The kind of missing that doesn't fade with time and doesn't get smaller when you reason with it. It just sits inside you, taking up space, reminding you every day that you once had something beautiful in your hands and had to let it go. And I think I'll be missing him for a long, long time. Because the worst kind of heartbreak isn't the one where someone leaves you. It's the one where you have to leave someone you love, not because they failed you, but because the truth arrived too late to save what you'd already started building. And all that's left is the echo of a voice in a kitchen on a Saturday morning, saying 4 words that were true and kind and completely useless. You deserve better than that. Yeah, I did. I just didn't know that better was going to be the thing that broke me. What would you do in this situation? Be honest. Or did this remind you of someone? Tell me in the comments. And if this made you think about your own relationship, I left something in the description that can help you build something stronger. Subscribe if you want more stories like this every day, and share this with someone who needs to hear this story.